Hey, what's up, everyone? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, the place where gaming meets comics meets sports, meets movies, as well as inspiration, of course, music as well. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media on Twitter/X at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow me on. You can also follow the show's Twitter page at Victory Pod 1. You can also follow me on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. Of course, you can also follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer for the unpopular review wrestling show Perfect Plex Talk Radio, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox. And so, of course, right now they're kind of going through a bit of a time transition, if you will, but that's another story. Of course, that won't be for long, but it's just quite a bit. For me to talk about right now, for one, going to cover certain things when it comes to the world of pop culture, as I like to do as well, along with sports. And so of course, some of the main topics I want to get into are about this recent NFL draft. Some of the things going on with the NBA playoffs, the shakeups, if you will, especially when it comes to Giannis. And how that's in limbo. We're going to talk about Thunderbolts making its way to the theaters pretty soon. Matter of fact, it's going to be this Friday, by the way. So as far as that, it's definitely action-packed, jam-packed box office right now, as well as definitely a jam-packed episode. I'm not going to sound cliche, but so I'm going to talk about that, talk about the NFL draft, and some of the controversy that came up through it. That, as well as, of course, just the world of wrestling as we know it right now, especially in this WrestleMania fallout, if you will, and just when it comes to PR and just a lack thereof, and just like the climate that we're in when it comes to wrestling. So of course, more on that later. But of course, like I said, it's been announced that of course, Thunderbolts is officially going to be in theaters this upcoming Friday. I think I catch up and slow down. Let me slow down. Catch up with sinners. Don't judge. We listen. We don't judge, right? So as far as that, as well as the upcoming Thunderbolts, so you're just like back to back. And also speaking of movies, matter of fact, it was announced that Avengers Doomsday start filming this week, and there's also news that Robert Downey Jr. is going to be like I said, I don't want to give out any spoilers, but yeah, like I said, I want to keep it zipped. So the main thing I know right now is that Avengers Doomsday, start filming this week, and so I definitely, that's definitely a great step into the next direction. So as far as that is concerned, and also, also especially when it comes to the world of sports, the NFL draft, just took place this past week. So Cam Ward was the first overall pick, followed by Travis Hunter. Let me see. I'm going to the NFL draft order. I'm not going to go into all those picks because that's way too much time. But at least some of the key ones, 2025 NFL draft ticker. We're going to who got drafted and who got shafted, if you will. But anyway. I know, like I say, Cam Ward was number one, Travis Hunter was number two. Yeah, and so of course, Cam Ward was the first overall pick out of University of Miami as a quarterback for the Tennessee Titans because they need one. The second overall pick was Travis Hunter, who got his draft rights traded from the Browns to the Jaguars. So of course, coming out of Colorado, the primetime program, if you will. So wide receiver / cornerback and Heisman Trophy winner, Travis Hunter, by the way. Need to add that in there as well. Third overall pick goes to the New York Giants as they selected edge rusher Abdul Carter. The fourth overall pick, the Patriots, as they selected offensive tackle Will Campbell. The Browns ended up getting the fifth pick, which happened to be Mason Graham. And of course, just going through the top 10 picks, the Las Vegas Raiders selected Ashton Genty, running back at Boise State. Armand Membu was drafted by the Jets as an offensive tackle out of Missouri. Of course, for the eighth pick, Teoria McMillan was drafted out of Arizona as a wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. And number 10, the New Orleans Saints picked Kelvin Banks Jr. as the offensive tackle, coming out of Texas. And then, of course, for the 10th overall pick, of course, the Chicago Bears selected tight end Colston Loveland out of Michigan. And so, of course, those are the top 10 picks and the more notable picks. And so, of course, the Giants also selected quarterback Jackson Dart, who got his draft rights traded from the Houston Texans. But the biggest story, the controversy that came out of this was, the son of primetime himself, Deion Sanders, this primetime son, of course, Deion Sanders' own son, Shedeur Sanders was drafted all the way, all the way down to like the fourth or fifth round, which is ridiculous. And so, so that's been the biggest headline of them all coming out of the NFL draft. If anything, that overshadowed, all the previous draft picks way before him, just because Shedeur was such a standout player in college, obviously under his dad's program, and so it's just that for someone with that much skill and that much talent to be overlooked the way he was, you could tell it was definitely politics. You could definitely tell it was, I know it's easy to throw the race card in there, but it was more about politics, about how they were trying to make an example out of him, take him through a humbling process, whatever the case may be. It was a huge controversy to the point where even Trump himself even chimed in, and it's bad when when someone like that is making a point that has some type of sense, which is ridiculous. But in general, it's just that that overall, Shedeur Sanders was definitely shafted. This was like I said, it was just to make a statement out of him, make an example out of him, and so of course, eventually the Cleveland Browns ended up drafting him, but apparently I've been hearing that they turned down their contract offer or something. Because clearly he knows, a guy like that definitely knows his value, and so apparently it's been said that that since it's been said that since Deion, as a matter of fact, he was drafted by the Cleveland Browns. Of course, round 5, pick 6, the 6th pick out of the 5th round, which is insane to even say that, and so so it's like one of those things where where the other teams have been saying to themselves, hey, look, we don't want him, but we'll let but if anything, we'll let the Browns take the leftovers. My fault. All right, sorry about that. My fault about that in the background. But yeah, anyway, like I said, as far as that, excuse me, I felt as though that was just a ridiculous move. It was definitely a way to try to blackball him, and make an example out of him, and try to humble him, and just really humiliation. You know what I mean? So it's just like the other teams, kind of got together. It was like, what, we don't want them. We're just going, just give the Cleveland Browns, whatever leftovers that we have at the end of the draft. Not saying he's a leftover, but that's how they treated him. And so, and if anything, I would say that this definitely has created a greater sense of interest when it comes to the Browns, when it comes to their TV ratings, when it comes to fan interest. And clearly it's going to be more eyes on the Browns now. Now that he's there, and especially with all this controversy, and they're going to see what this dude is really made of. And I would say he's definitely going to have an even bigger chip on his shoulder because of that. And plus, when you look at it, Cleveland is a pretty toxic place. Especially when you have Deshaun Watson and all the baggage that he has. Myles Garrett definitely wants to get out of there. And so it's just like morale is very, very low out there in Cleveland. And I'm thinking also that a lot of these owners are probably thinking to themselves, that they don't want, um, like some type of like headline circus following them, like when it comes to Shedeur, and it's just like they don't certain chances they don't want to take, whatever. I'm not justifying what they did at all whatsoever, but it's just like I'm pretty sure that's probably like the consensus viewpoint amongst themselves. Um, and so as far as that, that's what it is. And so who knows? A guy like Shedeur, could really use this as motivation, because one of his mentors, after all, is Tom Brady, and we all know about Brady's story about how he was drafted. He was a 6th-round pick, so he was at the very, very tail end, the twilight of that draft in 2000. And so the guy that he was under in New England, Drew Bledsoe, was the 1st overall pick himself. So on the same team, you have a guy who was the #1 overall pick, and then you have the guy who was a 6th-round pick. And it's funny how the tables turn for both of their careers. Bledsoe gets injured. Brady takes the Patriots to brand new heights they'd never ever seen before, and he becomes an icon and a GOAT, and Drew Bledsoe becomes an afterthought. You know what I mean? Brady's a solidified, guaranteed Hall of Famer. Um, if anything, as soon as his name shows up on the next ballot, so of course Brady is a shoe-in. There's no question whatsoever. I don't even see Bledsoe even being on a ballot. He's never been on a ballot yet, ever. And so it's just like, and plus it's like one of those what ifs. Like, it's like what if, it's like what if Bledsoe never got injured, right? It's pretty much, if anything, maybe I'm sure his numbers will be better, but at the same time, we would never know about Tom Brady. We would never know, his greatness and what he would eventually bring to the table. And so, and also, if anything, the Patriots would not have been Super Bowl champions. You know what I mean? So sorry about that. But yeah, like I said, if anything, if like I said, back to the point that if anything, if Bledsoe never got injured, like I said, we would never know what Brady and what he brought to the table. I'm not wishing an injury on anybody, but it's just like, certain things, were just meant to be, just meant to happen, in order for history to be what it is. It's like I said, if anything, the Patriots would not have been Super Bowl champions. They would not have become a dynasty. They would, it'd still be, just within the shuffle, never really standing out and becoming who they eventually become. And so of course, like it just happened to be a blessing in disguise, and that Brady ends up stepping in and becomes the icon that he is now. And so, if anything, who knows, that could be Shedeur's story. You know what I mean? And so it's just like only time will tell. And it's just like it's funny how they want to penalize Dion's family for nepotism, but I remember like when it comes to the Manning family, again, Archie, getting his kids involved, especially Eli. Eli was the main one who's been very demanding in terms of where he wanted to play, because I know the Chargers were originally drafted him, but they ended up trading his draft rights because he wanted to play in New York. He wanted to play in a bigger city. So so if anything, he was calling his shot. You never heard anything out of Peyton. You know what I mean? Because he just Peyton Manning was like, hey, whatever team drafts me, I'm going to make the most out of it. You know what I mean? Like, you never heard any complaints from him. But when it came to Eli, like that part right there, just turn off for me, to be honest. But yeah, like I say, when it comes to Shedeur, I definitely want to see the very best for him, and it's not going to be long before he's out of Cleveland. That's all I have to say. Now, when it comes to now, of course, I'm going to move on to NBA news as well. So now at this point, let's say that that the Knicks and Pistons are about to go to Game 6. Last night, the Milwaukee Bucks were bounced out in 5 games, tragically. Sadly by sadly by none other than the Indiana Pacers. Because Damian Lillard had gotten injured, and so the Bucks have been dealing with a lot of injury problems. And Giannis had to carry that team by himself. Of course, in a losing effort, he had a triple double, 30, 20, and 10, I believe, in 44 minutes of the game. And it's just like Giannis gave everything that he had, the heart of a champion. You know what I mean? And so and for his team to let him down like that, to fall to pieces around him, and the nerve of Halliburton's dad stepping up to him like that, talking that trash, and just getting up in his face. You know what I mean? It's just like it's like you better be glad that Giannis didn't just hit you with a jab. You know what I mean? It's just like, because he very well could have. But eventually, I think the dad ended up apologizing or whatever. But it's just like, dude, like, come on now, your team's already winning. Like, why even do that? Why even step in that dude's face? You know what I mean? I mean, if anything, Giannis very well could have knocked that dude's head off. And but yeah, it's just like, he's definitely the bigger man, figuratively and literally. And so this has very well been one of Giannis' best games, if not the best game that he's had outside of the finals. This is definitely one of Giannis's signature games, other than the championship game. Other than the games they had in the finals, and for him to lay it all out the way he did was definitely admirable. But at the same time, that the writing is on the wall when it comes to Giannis' future. I think this very well may be. Last night very well may have been his last game in the Milwaukee Bucks uniform. It drew parallels of LeBron in 2010 when he left Cleveland the first time, when they lost to the Celtics. And you could just tell by his body language after that game was over that he knew that his time had run out at that point. And it was time for him to move on to greener pastures. And that's what he did that summer. And so I see the same thing in Giannis's case, where you've run your course in that city. Only difference is that, LeBron's first tenure, he didn't win a championship yet. Whereas, and that was the first 7 years of LeBron's career. Giannis has been with the Bucks for 12 years, and he's already brought them, he already has a championship with them. Brought a championship to that team. The first one in 50 years. And, he's established his legend there. He's, is over there. He won a championship, finals MVP, 2 league MVPs. I want to say all-star MVP as well. I know he's a 2-time defensive player of the year. I know he got a defensive player of the year award over there, multiple all NBA, like first team selections and everything like that. He's a very decorated career, of course, thus far. But his team so far has been doing him no favor, especially with these coaching changes from Budenholzer to Doc Rivers. It's just like, it's not the same environment as it was before. And then you have revolving door, like I said, of different players coming through. Of course you have like some of the biggest pieces of your championship supporting cast are gone. Drew Holiday and PJ Tucker. Because Budenholzer gotten fired. So now you have Dame Lillard, who's another top 75 player just like you, and a future Hall of Famer as well. The chemistry is not the same. Even though, like I said, both future Hall of Famers and multi-time All-Stars and things like that, but they're both very ball dominant, and it's just like oil and water. It's hard for them to really blend it and really, be cohesive like that, and just be on one accord. And so it's just like, that lack of chemistry is, you could definitely tell. I mean, and it's definitely not hitting the way that they thought it would hit. And so it's just like, if anything, like I said, when it comes to Giannis, he still has career, still has a career ahead of him and everything. Of course, he's still very much at the top of his game, in the prime of his career. If anything at the top, to the top of his game, prime of his career. Like this window, he's still very, very much his prime window and everything. And so it's just like, you don't want to feel like you're spinning the rest of your wheels in a situation that's not getting any better. And Giannis, like I said, if anything, he's already left his mark over there. He definitely has an argument for the GOAT when it comes to the Bucks players, next to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of course. But just like how Kareem had to move on when the team was falling apart around him. Giannis is like, he may end up having to do the same thing. Don't let the loyalty be your Achilles heel. You know what I mean? I believe Giannis can make that move in a way that would not be seen as distasteful or controversial, because he's not a guy that carries himself that way. You know what I mean? He's, so if anything, I definitely want to see nothing for the best for him, for the Greek Freak. I'm a big fan of his, a huge supporter of his. Like when it comes to modern players, outside like LeBron and King, Giannis, in that era, like after that, Giannis has been my favorite. I've been rooting for him every step of the way. As I said before in this podcast, once he's one of those athletes, I'll definitely defend. And so if anything, I definitely want to see absolutely nothing but the best for him, because he deserves nothing but the best. You don't want to see someone squander the rest of their best years, in a situation that's not getting any better. So of course, those are my thoughts when it comes to Giannis and the state of emergency when it comes to his career. So now moving on to, sorry, don't do that. Of course, now moving on to the world of wrestling. As we see, I'm going to get to another state of emergency as well with this in a minute. As we see that the John Cena and Randy Orton feud has been reignited during Cena's farewell tour, and I meant to include last week, because I was just so focused on everything WrestleMania, just that whole weekend. I didn't think about the Raw after WrestleMania, but of course the night after Mania, Cena gets a surprise as he looks at his longtime nightmare, Randy Orton. Like I said, the night after Mania, Cena called himself the last real WWE champion, and so Randy Orton just sneaks up right behind him and creates a meme, which is hilarious. And like I said, Orton just looking, just waiting to pounce. So Cena turns around at the right time, and Orton just nails him to RKO. I mean, that was the RKO heard around the world. You know what I mean? So of course, Backlash is going to take place in Orton's hometown of St. Louis. So of course, this is going to be the last dance that Cena and Orton have, because this whole farewell tour. Last time is now. So of course, it's great to see them spin the block one more time, one last time. Why not? So if anything, I would say that Randy Orton is John Cena's greatest rival. So as far as that's concerned, and like I said, I wouldn't mind to see that rivalry revisited one last time, right? And also, right after WrestleMania, Becky Lynch, of course, turned heel and attacked Lyra Valkyria after they lost the tag titles. I don't know why they even won it in the first place. Or they're going to lose them. They're going to lose them the next night. So as far as that, and now, of course, Rhea Ripley is going to, like I said, she's definitely in a bit of a four-way, if you will. Not only dealing with Io Sky, but also Julia and Roxanne Perez as well. So that's definitely definitely quite a dynamic in and of itself. It's definitely creates some pretty fun elements, if you will. And also, what was I going to say? Also, of course, also the Street Profits had, of course, retained the tag team titles in San Antonio against DIY, as well as the Motor City Machine Guns. And I like how Montez paid homage to Shawn Michaels with his gear. I thought that was awesome. And we also saw that, of course, AJ Styles lost Logan Paul. I guess we saw a little bit of a tease of maybe AJ Styles and Nick Aldis kind of spin the block one more time, especially since they've been rivals back in TNA. And so as far as that, and of course, and speaking of TNA as well, and TNA champion Joe Hendry has gotten into the NXT mix himself. And so on and so forth. Especially when we got involved in a segment with Trick Williams and Obafemi after WrestleMania, and how of course, how I talked about how he was able to be on that stage, and Trick reminded him they got whooped at WrestleMania, and so now it looks like it's going to be boiling down to Obafemi versus Joe Hendry, chamber versus champion. At least this would be a much better match than Obafemi versus Moose. I will say that. So as far as that, and I don't want to sound like this whole thing's gonna just flying everywhere. But all I was gonna say, like I said, when it comes to TNA, Trick Williams also made a cameo and made a cameo appearance and attacked Joe Hendry on TNA's recent programming. Metafour made a cameo appearance at TNA. And speaking of Metafour, it looks like it could be Metafour No More. Because especially last night on NXT, clearly shows that they officially announced backstage segment that they're going to be going their separate ways. And there's talks that Trick and Lash could be called up to the main roster, especially with Lash Legend's upside in her improvement and her growth and everything like that. And it's a shame that Metafour never won the women's tag titles in NXT. And it's a shame that Lash never won a title in NXT herself. But that could be a blessing to you because if you look at the example of Bianca Belair, she was never the NXT Women's Champion. But look at how her career has turned out since being on the main roster. The possibilities are endless. So as far as that, like I say, pretty much, that is what it is. And also, I want to say that of course, say that Liv and Raquel relinquished the as a matter of fact, that Liv Morgan it's been announced that she's going to take a break, and she's going to end up taking a break for Hollywood as she landed a major superhero role herself, and so it's just like especially now that so. Let's see. And so of course, clearly this role that she's having in Hollywood is not going to be a small one, and it looks like that Liv's going to be out the picture for a minute. And so in terms of who's going to be her replacement, that's going to be a pretty big deal. So that's going to be some large shoes to fill. And the thing is, as far as Liv Morgan, I definitely like her. I like how she has made improvements, like right in front of our eyes. She's grown by leaps and bounds, and so for her to get this call up, for Hollywood, especially a superhero role, I mean, that, that ain't nothing to sneeze at all. That unless you know what type of value that she has, what type of upside that she really, really has. Um, and so, so if anything, so I think that I wish, nothing the absolute best, um, for her when it comes to this role, as far as other doors that are going to open for her as well. And it's of course another thing. Speaking of the women's division, unfortunately, Bianca Belair has been sidelined because of injury, injury to her fingers, and so of course the EST is going to be on the shelf for right now. And in other, let's see, of course, in other women's division news, Naomi has also announced she did an interview on the Bella Twins podcast about how this is, going to end up being her final run because because she wants to step away and start a family. And I definitely applaud her for that because it's very admirable. And she talked about how she's 37, how she knows that there's not a lot of time left for her, and if anything, that she really wants to, really wants to get things done and start her own family. Start her own family. Her and Jimmy. And so, if anything, if this is the case, it's definitely going to be the best one of her career, especially with her being a heel. I mean, this has been the most, impactful, meaningful, significant, if you will. No shade to the rest of her career, but it's definitely, this storyline, this run that she has carries so much weight in a major way. You know what I mean? And so if this is going to be her farewell swan song, it's definitely going to be a great send off. You know what I mean? So this whole heel character, proceed with caution, it's amazing. I'm loving it. You know what I mean? And so, like I said, let's give Naomi all the flowers, all the roses, that everything that she absolutely deserves. And so of course, another thing I want to bring up as well is, of course, one of the main topics I want to talk about is this Seth Rollins, heel turn, and with Paul Heyman in his corner, it now looks like he's forming a faction. Heyman's forming a faction featuring Seth Rollins and Braun Breaker, and there's a mystery in terms of who the next member of this group is going to be. And so, I mean, it's just like so many choices. It talks about Austin Theory, Carmelo Hayes, Bronson Reed. You know what I mean? So, and there were a lot of comparisons to Evolution. I don't want to get so caught up on past comparisons. It's just like, let this storyline be what it is. Let this group be what it is. Just like with Judgment Day, there were no real past reference points that you could point to when it comes to the Judgment Day, but they made it something very unique. You know what I mean? If anything, they turned it into their own image. So let this group, be its own thing. And so on. Yes. So and the thing is, the running talking point, if you will, is that Seth Rollins has now become, Seth Rollins has now become what he hated in Roman Reigns. He hated how Roman had Heyman as his wise man. He hated how Roman, was this tyrant who, he wanted to dominate the top spot, and it just had so much of a stranglehold, if you will. And now he has become what he despised, what he hated in Rome. It's almost like, almost like on Revenge of the Sith, Obi told Anakin that he became what he hated. And so this is what it is when it comes to Seth Rollins. Seth still wears you know, the crazy looking clothing and stuff like that. He still has that goofy laugh, but it's taken on a more sinister tone, more sinister approach. You know, and if anything, I would say that the biggest breakout star, I think this is going to be a huge vehicle for Braun Breaker to become bigger than what he is. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that's what it is. Much like how Evolution was used to propel Randy Orton and Batista, I think this was going to propel Braun Breaker even further than what he's been before. You know, and not only did Seth attack CM Punk and Roman Reigns after WrestleMania, but he's also attacked his fellow former ROH alumni Sami Zayn, you know, and especially and also Sami called him out, like the way that he was threatening him, and just like giving ultimatums, gaslighting, all this type of stuff. It's very parallel to Roman, and that's who Seth really wants to be, and he hates that he's not that guy. But Heyman is there to elevate him, as far as he can take him. Do I see Seth having a historically long title run like Roman? Not quite. But it's going to add another dimension to his character and really elevate him more than what he's been before. Because let's make it clear, I know people have criticized Roman because of because of the opportunities he's given, because of his family and all this other type of stuff. At this point, the whole nepotism thing is a moot point. You know what I mean? Because nepotism is all throughout wrestling. So let me just go and just throw this out there, just throughout this little, PSA announcement, if you will, going off a little off script, if you will. If you're going to criticize, I think I've said this before. But I said before, I've said, like Shawn Michaels said, if I told you once, I told you 1,000 times. Anyway, if you're going to penalize Roman, because of his family, because of his family connections and his lineage and all this other type of stuff, well, guess what? Keep the same energy with Charlotte. Well, you already do anyway. Like I said, if anything, if anything, penalize Roman and Charlotte. Like I said, because of that, keep the same energy when it comes to The Rock. Keep the same energy when it comes to Bret Hart. Keep the same energy when it comes to Randy Orton. Keep the same energy when it comes to anybody else, who comes from multi-generational, wrestling. Hold on. So I'm in on YouTube, and of course, acknowledge me. That's right. Like I say, I'm gonna brush past a little Vanity Fair interview that Roman Diaz, another story. But anyway, like I said, if you're gonna back to what I was saying, if you're gonna penalize Roman because of who his family is, then guess what? Like I say, I need who will win Orton. Oh yeah, who will win Orton or Cena? Because he's a hometown guy. There's a part of me that wants to say Orton, but I don't see Cena just being, someone off transitional champion either. So it's just like heart says Orton, the head says Cena. That's the best way I can explain it. But anyway, as I was saying, if people are going to give Roman a hard time because of his family, I need you to keep the same energy when it comes to the aforementioned Randy Orton, because he's a third generation himself. Keep the same energy when it comes to The Rock, and he's the greatest of his bloodline, of his lineage. Keep the same energy when it comes to Bret Hart. Keep the same energy, rest in peace, when it came to Eddie Guerrero. So on and so forth. Same opinion, 100%. Great minds think alike, dude. All right. So yeah, like I said, So this narrative, this talking point about about Roman getting too many opportunities because of his family. His family. So what? It's right. And the thing is, you know, just like anybody else in life, you know, Roman could not choose the family that he came from. The same way that I can't choose the family I come from. Same way that you can't choose the family that you came from. It's just that Roman, happens to come from a really cool and popular family. Oh, by the way, speaking of nepotism, also you want to keep the same energy when it comes to Cody as well, Mr. Finisher Story. I'm just saying, second generation. So if anything, like I just wanted to just get off on that. It's just like for people that give Roman a hard time, like saying got a lot of his title shots because of who he's related to. If anything, when you come from a wrestling family or dynasty, there's even more pressure on you to succeed. So if anything, he has exceeded expectations. So that needs to be commended. You know, um, so it's just like all right, yes, he definitely has a lineage. But at the same time, a lot of it was his own hard work from his own hands. But yeah, so as far as, but I go back I say all that to say that people complain about Roman's opportunities. Well, guess what? I say all that to say that Seth Rollins himself has that opportunity after opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to be the guy, to be the face of the company, chance after chance. Let's not act like the company has not been trying to make Seth Rollins a thing for the longest time, ever since the Shield broke up, right? And like I said, I've said this before. I don't want to sound like I'm rambling, going on a tangent or whatever, but I'm getting back to my story. Even though like I said, even the Roman has had multiple chances eventually it's paid off. But like I said, let's not act like Seth Rollins hasn't been giving plenty of opportunities, especially because of his connection with Triple H and what have you, right? It just so happens, as I said before, just so happened that Roman was a bigger and better investment, and that's why he's had such a historically great title run. Seth has had multiple titles himself. He's never had the belt as long as that because he was never as big enough of a draw for people to have that type of interest to see him hold the belt, for 4 years. And not only that, but of course, Roman was the head of one of the most compelling storylines in the history of wrestling, the Bloodline saga, which is now officially over. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, like I said, as far as that, I know Seth Rollins has had multiple opportunities, to be that guy. He's one of, but not truly the number one defining, wrestler star of his generation. That belongs to Roman Reigns. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all whatsoever, right? It's just like when Elijah won those back-to-back championships. Like he definitely made his mark, made himself a legend in the Hall of Fame or whatnot, all-time great. When you think about that generation, when you think about 90s basketball, the first name that comes to mind is Jordan. I'm not calling Roman the GOAT, whatever. When it comes to the best of his generation, he is. So when you think about, this era, when it comes to like post John Cena era it is, like I said, from 2015 on down to pandemic and all this other type of stuff, the defining name of this era, whatever time frame you want to start at, the defining name post John Cena would be Roman Reigns. You know what I mean? 10 WrestleMania main events. A title reign that lasted 1,316 days. The merchandise sales and the, PLE numbers and, ratings numbers, all these metrics point to Roman. And so that's not a slight on Seth's career. Seth can make his own mark, which he already has and he still is. But at the same time, I feel as though that argument has already been settled. That debate, like I said, if anything, the whole Seth and Roman debate, yeah, it's great as a rivalry standpoint. When it comes to dance partners, when you talk about legacy-wise, when it comes to their trajectory in terms of historically where they rank, who checks more boxes, I would say it's Roman. But at the same time, Seth's going to benefit greatly from this, from this Paul Heyman alliance himself. I mean, just much like how, because Roman himself really benefited at the greatest run of his career because of his association with Paul Heyman. CM Punk at the greatest title run of his career because of his association with Paul Heyman, 434 days. And Seth Rollins could very well have the best, probably the best run of his career outside of Seth freaking Rollins, or maybe even the architect, whatever the case is, you know what I mean. So as far as that, I would say that this Heyman affiliation is going to do miracles for him. And so, what do you think of the Jey Uso? Yeah, absolutely. Jey Uso definitely deserves. Glad you brought that up because I did not want to gloss over that. Jey Uso absolutely deserves to be the World Heavyweight Champion. Is he going to have, like I said, he's going to have some like a historic, transcendent, super long title run? I don't quite think so. But because of his popularity, it's definitely had to pay off. As far as like Geek Mania, because of his merchandise sales, because like I said, just because he's on commercials and everything like that, it's just he's too much of a moneymaker for you not to for that not to pay off at WrestleMania. Come on now, because he's got no in-ring skill. You know what? I'm going to say, like I said, I would say that that Jay's my skills are pretty solid. The thing that carries him is his persona. That's what really carries him. His character. And to say that he's got no in-ring skills, can't really say that. Because is he a Bret Hart or is he a Kurt? No. Is he a Kurt Angle? No. Is he a Shawn Michaels? Absolutely not. But for what Jey Uso brings to the table, it's definitely. He's been a company for 14 years. But see, here's the thing. I don't want to get wrapped up too much in this. Here's the thing about Jey. He has been affiliated with a tag team, for just a legendary tag team, by the way, for such a long time. You know what I mean? So it's just like so much of what he's so much of it he's tied to has been with the tag team. But at the same time, Jey has like I said, Jey's definitely improved. He's definitely come a long way. And the thing is, he's got a lot of fan support because he was a central figure in that aforementioned bloodline saga that I mentioned just now about Roman. You know what I mean? Like, other than Roman, Jey has been one of the pillars of that storyline. And there's so many fans who stood beside him and watched him get gaslit, watched him get abused and just get picked on, by Roman over and over and over. And it's just like now it's just time to really see that payoff. You know what I mean? So now the tables have turned. Now Jey is a champion and Roman is not. Roman has nobody at this point, right? And so it's just like like I said, it's almost like Yes-O-Mania, the Daniel Bryan movement, or even Kofi Mania, if you will. It's just like just an organic, fan movement, if you will, where it's just like where someone like Jey is just undeniable, plain and simple. Now, granted, let me say this: would I have, matter of fact, to address you're concerned about Jey Uso. For the record, would I have given him a 90 on WWE 2K24? No, I wouldn't. I would not have given Jay a higher rating than Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels. No, but at the same time, you cannot deny what he brings to the table. It's just like, as much as everybody loves Jeff Hardy, I mean, nobody was mistaking Jeff Hardy for Shawn Michaels in the ring. But but the thing is, Jeff, always had a great persona, highly charismatic. He's definitely a high flyer, a daredevil, if you will. And so, so if anything, that type of thing, especially when it came to the different colors, his hair, the tattoos, all that type of stuff, that was a moneymaker. And that propelled Jeff to to his own main event status. He's been a WWE champion and a World Heavyweight champion. You know what I mean? Would I say that Jeff, would have been as big as Austin and Cena? Not quite, but he was a pretty big freaking deal. And so Jay has become kind of a big deal in it to an extent. Now, like I said, I'm not saying he's going to be carrying the company. I'm not saying he's going to be on the level that Roman has been, but it's just like because of his rise in popularity, and also with the way that Gunther was taking out Jimmy, it's just like he had no other choice but for Jay to win. There's my Jay Uso news right there. But yeah, like I said, if anything, I'm glad that I'm glad you're concerned about Jey Uso. But yeah, like I said, when it comes to Rollins, it's just that like he's definitely going to benefit greatly when it comes to association with Paul Heyman. When it comes to as far as what the title reign is going to look like, only time will tell, right? And so I hope I'm not like skipping over anything. But speaking of World Heavyweight Championships, the former World Heavyweight Champion Gunther is going to be facing Pat McAfee at Backlash. So we've gone from the loose reigning Intercontinental Champion, to a pretty great, to a strong World. We went from the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion, to World Heavyweight Champion, who's definitely an upper echelon, high caliber technician in the ring. Like I said, when I dance with the likes of Randy Orton, among many others. So it's just like, you go from that to Pat McAfee. Come on now. And McAfee, was definitely, digging into his real American, persona, if you will, pretty much like, America versus the foreign enemy type of thing. He was digging into his, Sergeant Slaughter 1984 versus Iron Sheik bag, if you will. Digging into his HH bag against the enemy. You know what I mean? So it's just like, Pat McAfee was definitely going into it, especially since on Netflix. He was definitely letting those F-bombs drop. And I was saying to myself, I was like, man, that ain't PG, dude. But at the same time, I knew this is on Netflix. They're definitely going to be taking liberties when it came to the language. And so like I said, we've gone from, Gunther's gone from being the longest reigning IC champion. He's gone from facing Sami Zayn, Randy Orton, Jey Uso to Pat McAfee. I mean, whatever. You know what I mean? And so it's just like, and then another thing I want to bring up is just the state of WWE as we know it right now. It's just like so much of a mystery, so much of an unknown. It's just like, I think in Las Vegas, I've mentioned before, it's just like in Las Vegas, they just let it all out there. They just, I guess, Paul Beckner, like, they just let them be themselves. It's just like, also with this WrestleMania roast, um, it's been, it's been banned, it's been buried, it's been, because clearly they know that the material that they put out was in bad taste. You know what I mean? So it's just like, um, if you know that the material wasn't that bad, then you keep it up there. But the thing is, that lets me know the fact that they canceled it, the fact that they are removing it from everywhere, lets me know that there were a lot of things more than just that Nia Jax excerpt. A lot of other things that were said that were just downright foul. Paul Heyman, uh, saying, Paul Heyman saying racist stuff towards Mexicans. Talking about somebody getting deported. And also like just going off the cuff on the WWE world. Talking about the Shannon Sharp thing, and it's Pat McAfee was just like, hey, calm down, but at the same time, it's like, it's like they had no shame at all whatsoever. I don't know if it's just the atmosphere in Vegas, but it's just like, ever since then, just moving on down, it's just like now they've become far more emboldened than they've ever been before. They like I said, they look at the ticket prices. You just look at, it's just like, just like the environment in and of itself. And I know that there have been multiple complaints online about this, about how they're just being so abrasive in their nature, and it's and it's not something that I can really justify. I'm not the biggest fan of it myself, you know what I mean? And it's especially when it comes to the audience that they're leaning to, you know what I mean? Like, further right end of it, if you will. And it's just like how they're leaning into that, they're not beating those allegations. If anything, they're embracing those allegations, and just like Triple H is just like, let's just take off the mask altogether and show them who we are and what we're about and what we really stand for, and it's definitely something that really is enough to make your skin itch, and it's very concerning when I say the state of emergency. The state of emergency as it pertains to WWE, when it comes to this TKO partnership, the state of emergency when it comes to the creative, aspect, when it comes to this whole fallout with The Rock and Triple H, and that horrible interview that The Rock did on Pat McAfee show, and how you could tell this dude was just BS. Let's call it what it is. About how there was no 10 or 20 steps, going to this whole Final Boss thing. How it would, how Ari Emanuel just called him up, just call him up because ticket sales were low for Elimination Chamber, and they just needed some type of shot in the arm. And so The Rock was the one to, shoot that needle up there, man. That's what it was. There's no long-term plan for John Cena selling his soul and all this other type of stuff. Come to find out, it's just like, I just did it, just did that just to boost the ticket sales, and just left everything else, just let everybody fall in their face, and so that's why WrestleMania turned out the way it did, with the main event with Travis Scott, and there was no payoff with The Rock coming out, along with Travis. It's just Travis, just coming out and helping Cena. No payoff from the Final Boss. None of that. He said the Final Boss thing is done. So it's just a creative, just stain, just gross. You know what I mean? And just this whole thing, just petty back and forth between him and Triple H. power struggle, his ego stroke, and how that beef has never died down ever since they've stepped away from the ring. You know, um, and it's just left so much of WWE just in shambles right now. And it's definitely time to press the to press the detonator button, because this is a state of emergency. That's why I call it that. That's why I call this episode state of emergency. And it's just that just that that WWE really needs to wake up and smell the coffee, because there are a lot of fans that are becoming very disenchanted with what it is that they have to offer, especially when it comes to those WrestleMania ticket prices. I know that people that they aren't going to be going on any PLEs for a while because of that. So it's definitely time to wake up and smell that coffee and press that button, because it's time to make that make that course change. So that's what it is. It's definitely a whirlwind. It's definitely tailspin. So it's pretty much what I really have to say as far as tonight. And so of course it's just WWE. Like I said, it's time to seems slow. It's time to make an about face, and it's time for them to to redirect course in a better direction. That's all I have to say about that. And so now it's time for birthdays. So April 29th, Michelle Pfeiffer turned 67. Of course, on the same day, Holly Morris from Fox 5 turned 54. On April 30th, Isaiah Thomas, of course, a Pistons legend, two-time NBA champion and basketball Hall of Famer, turned 64. May 1st, Ray Parker Jr. Of course, Ray Parker Jr. Turned 71. Of course, on the same day, Victoria Monet turns 36. On the same day, Tina Campbell from Mary turns 51. Of course, Erica Campbell just celebrated her birthday, and she just turned 53 of course, on April 29th. Of course, on May 2nd, of course, the final boss, The Rock, turns 53. Of course, the Big Boss Man will turn 62, and Pat McAfee turns 38. On May 3rd, James Brown will turn 92. Of course, Graham from Public Enemies podcast turns 37, and of course, Greg Gumbel will turn 79. And that's it when it comes to birthdays. And of course, my word of wisdom is that what you don't know can hurt you. And so, and of course, when you reject the knowledge of God, He would, if anything, He would reject whatever plans that you have because you don't put Him first. But thankfully, God gives us a cure through obedience, and He gives us the opportunity to bring correction to our mistakes. And that Jesus, and the cures that Jesus will give us life and life more abundantly for ourselves in an environment to gain knowledge of His word. So that is my word of wisdom. And also remember that you are victorious, because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in the last place. Please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. You can also subscribe on YouTube, or youtube.com/@VonRexford Jr. Please make sure like subscribe for more great content. Of course, I want to say thank you very much. Thank you very much for watching, as well as listening. And may this day be the very best day of your life.